Broadcasting live from the mountains of Montana, get ready for an hour of pure, unapologetic conservative talk radio. Liberals beware, because this is the Wise Conservative Show.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Wise Conservative Show. I'm your host, Connor Wise. We have a lot that happened this past week. I mean, from the budget to more info coming out about the Russia investigation. But to start out, another terrible event did happen today. There was a school shooting in Florida. And of course, my thoughts and prayers go out to the families and the victims of that terrible accident or terrible tragedy. But of course, as always happens, liberals can't even give them one day for grieving. They can't even give them hours for grieving. Chelsea Handler, who's of course a famous comedian, took to Twitter to capitalize on this tragic incident and to blame Republicans very quickly. It was just hours after the gunman opened fire at that school. She's a self-proclaimed political activist. I'm sure you've heard a lot of her tweets and issues that she discusses on my show just because they're outrageous a lot of the times. She posted a tweet about midterm elections hours after this event, urging voters to elect candidates that aren't funded by the NRA and who won't allow kids to go to school and get shot. The whole tweet reads, quote, "We have to elect candidates that are not funded by the NRA in November. We have an opportunity to elect candidates who won't allow kids to go to school and get shot. It is disgusting how many times this has happened, and Republicans do nothing. You all have blood on your hands." Now, this happens every time there's a tragedy in America, especially when it involves guns. Liberals take to social media, Twitter, Facebook, everywhere. They go on an interview right away, blaming it on guns and blaming it on Republicans, making it political. Folks, I'm not going to make this a political issue right now. I am going to criticize Chelsea Handler for how she reacted to this. I'm going to criticize all the times that every other Democrat and liberal has turned all these events political. This shouldn't be a political event, folks. This should be an event that we as Americans mourn together for. It used to be when tragedies hit America, we came together as Americans. We came together and actually saw what had happened. But nowadays, that's not what's happening. Nowadays, they have to make it political. They have to make it stick to their agenda no matter what. And so we see them going to Twitter right away. I mean, hours, sometimes within an hour, like Hillary Clinton did during her campaign. Hours after these events, and they're talking about politics and blaming this on Republicans and on conservatives and on the NRA and the gun community in general. It doesn't matter what actually happened. They will blame it on us. But see, they're not going to change this even when they get called out for it. And we saw many Twitter users actually calling her out for it, saying that she couldn't even give them hours to mourn, how we didn't even know all of what had happened yet because the news hadn't come out because it was that quickly. But because they're liberal, the media puts them in a good light whenever they do this. We see CNN, MSNBC, CBS, all of these stations praising them and agreeing with them whenever this happens. We see them saying that, yes, we need this, that we need more people speaking out like this seconds, minutes after these events happen. That's not what we need, folks. We don't need people making this event political right away. We don't need that. That's not going to help. And I mean, you scroll through these feeds on Twitter and Facebook, and you see all these liberals who are saying, prayers and thoughts towards these victims doesn't help. The only thing that helps is gun control. And you see him post it constantly. They don't want us to take any time to grieve or to mourn for the victims. They take every event and say that we need to ban guns because of it. Even though all they have is the emotional argument. And I said this last week because it's very true. Liberals and Democrats are very good at using emotional arguments. They're very good at it, and that's why they capitalize on this so much. They're just so good at it, and they have to do it, and that's how they get elected, because of these emotional arguments, and that's how they are able to even get people on their side in terms of legislation. They ignore the fact that whenever there's gun control, more people are dead. And they ignore the fact that on school campuses, legal carrying of guns is not allowed. They ignore the fact that how in Israel, where teachers carry firearms, there's not these types of shootings. Or back when teachers were and students were allowed to have guns on campus, back decades ago, there were a lot less school shootings because people were able to defend themselves. They ignore those facts and just go for the emotional argument. They ignore the fact that this happened seconds ago. It disgusts me that they do this every time, and it's not just celebrities, it's politicians themselves. And politicians should know better. I mean, they've been in politics for decades. They should know better than to jump on this and politicize it right away. But apparently they don't. But that's enough on that, because I don't want to delve into something that I've talked about countless times, because they can't seem to change the way that they act when it comes to tragedies in our nation. Switching gears quite a bit to, the previous administration. Of course, the past few weeks have been detrimental to the public viewing of the previous administration, from the FISA memo, just to even details about the Steele dossier and all of that. Well, now more information is coming out. There's this newly released Inauguration Day email that was just given out, in which Obama, his National Security Advisor, Susan Rice, detailed a meeting with the outgoing president, James Comey, and even others. And it's definitely raising new questions for the former FBI director, considering in the Senate testimony last June, he never mentioned this sit-down. In his opening statement at the time to the Senate Intelligence Committee, James Comey downplayed his meetings with then-President Barack Obama, contrasting them with the numerous conversations he had with President Trump before his firing. Quote, "I spoke alone with President Obama twice in person and never on the phone, once in 2015 to discuss law enforcement policy issues, and a second time briefly for him to say goodbye in late 2016. Yet Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley, a Republican from Iowa, and Senator Lindsey Graham, a Republican, earlier this week, released an email that Rice sent to herself on the Inauguration Day last year, detailing an Oval Office meeting that was held on January 5th with Obama, Comey, Joe Biden, and then Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates, and of course, herself, Rice. The meeting apparently talked about the Russia investigation. Quote, and this is from Rice in the email, "President Obama began the conversation by stressing his continued commitment to ensuring that every aspect of this issue is handled by the intelligence and law enforcement communities by the book. The president stressed that he is not asking about initiating or instructing anything from a law enforcement perspective. He reiterated that our law enforcement teams need to proceed as it normally would by the book." Now, the Daily Caller first flagged the potential discrepancy between Comey's Senate testimony. He never actually talked about this meeting. All he said was that he met with Obama alone in 2015 and 2016 and just ignored all the meetings where he wasn't alone with him. And it's definitely unclear why Comey wouldn't mention this to Senate. In a letter pressing Rice for an explanation of the email, Grassley and Graham posed several other questions regarding Comey's role in the meeting. Specifically, they asked whether Comey mentioned the potential press coverage of the controversial anti-Trump dossier, and whether he described the FBI's relationship with the dossier author, former British spy Christopher Steele. Of course, in the recent memo, the House Intelligence Committee said the dossier was critical in the application for the FISA warrant against Carter Page, a Trump associate. But the Democrats are still saying that that was misleading and are pushing for the release of their own version. But speaking Monday night, Graham said that he wants to know what Comey said when Obama urged the investigation be done, quote, by the book. Graham questioned whether Comey mentioned that the source of information for the warrant came from a paid operative of the Democratic Party. And of course, Steele's research was funded through Fusion GPS with help from the DNC and the Clinton campaign. Graham then went on to say, quote, "This is the oddest conversation I can imagine." Rice also wrote in this email that Obama said, quote, "He wants to be sure that as we engage with the upcoming team, we are mindful to be certain if there is any reason that we cannot share information fully as it relates to Russia." She then added, quote, "The president asked Comey to inform him if anything changes in the next few weeks that should affect how we share classified information with the upcoming team." Comey said he would. Rice's attorney actually did respond, saying that there was nothing unusual about Rice, quote, "memorializing an important discussion for the record," and then went on to say the Obama White House was justifiably concerned about how comprehensive they should be in their briefings regarding Russia to the members of the Trump transition team, particularly Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, given the concerning communications between him and Russian officials. Now, despite the suggestions that the meeting touched on the Trump dossier, she said, quote, "The discussion that Ambassador Rice documented did not involve the so-called Steele dossier," and then added, "Any insinuation that Ambassador Rice's actions in this matter were inappropriate is yet another attempt to distract and deflect from the importance of the ongoing investigations into Russian meddling in America's democracy." So what exactly do we have here? And now we've had a lot of text messages and emails that did come out in regards to the Russian investigation. And all of them always point to the same thing. All of them always point to the fact that the Obama administration was working rather sketchily on this issue. Now, if there wasn't anything sneaky going on, I don't see why Obama would have to say that they had to do it by the books. And I feel like if he did know, which it's more than likely that he knew where the Steele dossier came from, well, I feel like he would try to continue to do that but hide the information. Now, this is my own personal opinion here, folks. This is how I've analyzed this whole situation. I feel like Rice sent this to herself with that quote from Obama to try to make it seem like Obama was urging them to do it well, when in actuality they probably were discussing how that was funded by the DNC, how it was funded by the Clinton campaign, but trying to figure out how to keep that from coming to light. There's a reason why Comey didn't talk about this in his Senate meeting, because he knows that there was incriminating evidence within it. He knows that they were discussing something that was illegal, and that's exactly what the FISA memo details. Illegal behavior by the FBI. Illegal behavior that suggests that they were conspiring against then candidate or President-elect Donald Trump. Folks, this is big, and this is a scandal that we've never seen before. This is as big, if not worse, than Watergate. This is proof that the Obama administration was using the FBI as their own personal bodyguard against conservatives, against their opponents, using them as a political bodyguard. We already know that they did that with the IRS. We already know that the IRS was targeting conservatives. That's been proven. And now this is being proven as we speak, folks. This is new information that's coming out every day, proving how the Obama administration continually and repeatedly abused their power. I'm going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, the budget and the debt. Don't go anywhere. This is the Wise Conservative Show. Hey everybody, Connor Wise here with an exclusive sneak peek of the Wise Conservative Show. Don't go anywhere, I'll be right back. With universal health care, which is essentially the next step beyond Obamacare, this is where Democrats want to take the country. This is where the left wants us to go. With universal health care, now there's no insurance companies, no one competing whatsoever, and the government controls it all.
Calling all young conservatives. Have you ever wanted to write for an online publication? What about host your own conservative radio program? Now you can, thanks to youthrevolt.org. Youth Revolt is a conservative media network for young people, the goal of which is to educate our fellow Americans and also to expose the left-wing indoctrination that goes on in classrooms across the country. Become part of a team that is dedicated to taking the country back, one radio program or opinion column at a time. If you're interested, go to youthrevolt.org and click on Join Us on the top of the page. Fill out our brief questionnaire, and one of our representatives will be in touch with you in no time at all. The time to reclaim our future is now. Be a part of something that's bigger than yourself, and join the movement today. Youth Revolt. Speak without fear. My friends, I'm going to be blunt with you. There are a lot of frauds out there today. People who claim to be conservatives and yet, in one way or another, believe that more government is the solution to our problems. That's not what conservatism is about, and even more than that, that's not what our Constitution is about. I'm Jason Veely, a recent college grad who has the guts to say what needs to be said without pulling any punches. On my radio show, you can expect 100% pure conservatism every single weeknight at 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. Join me as we discuss history, liberty, and conservative philosophy in a style that is just as entertaining as it is educational. Who says we can't have fun tearing down the liberal establishment? Tune in to the Jason Veely program live every weeknight at 7 o'clock on youthrevolt.org. I'll see you out on the battlefield.
America is known for its expansive wilderness for all to explore, and for many, that exploration is an important hobby. This exploration is why the Survivalist was created. On this blog, you will find expansive information on all things wilderness, from what knife you should carry to what backpack gives you the best bang for your buck. This group of 4 writers has created a very diversified and useful site, which I personally recommend. The site has given me much knowledge on a variety of topics, and I urge you to check it out at the-survivalist.weebly.com. Once again, that is the-survivalist.weebly.com.
I was assuming that it meant coverage, but if he says that there's a small group of people who understood what it was, so I'm like, what is it? What is confetti?
It gets 2 scoops. You know, everyone around the table gets 1, and no word if there were sprinkles.
He paid $38 million, looks like $38 million in taxes.
Are you tired of listening to the snowflake liberal media report about ice cream scoops and typos instead of real facts? Well, at the Wise Conservative Show, we promise you that we will not report about Kofifi but instead about the truth, instead about the facts about what's going on in our nation. Join us every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on The Wise Conservative Show for your dose of unapologetic conservative talk radio. The Wise Conservative Show, only on Youth Revolt. Welcome back to the Wise Conservative Show. I'm your host, Connor Wise, and as promised, we're getting into our debt and into the budget. And folks, this is a topic that I have done a lot of research into. I have looked up a lot of stuff on because I am very passionate about this topic. It's one of the reasons why I have the views that I do, and one of the reasons why I am a conservative. Our spending within our government is one of the primary beliefs that a conservative ought to hold. Now, within this past week, we saw a lot of talk about spending within the government, of course, with the most recent threat of a government shutdown and, of course, the shutdown for a night. So before that shutdown happened, there was a speech given by Senator Rand Paul within the Senate explaining as to why he doesn't think we should vote to do this temporary funding of the government. The speech was about an hour long. It was to basically delay the vote because they weren't listening. They weren't even giving them time to read what was happening in this bill. It was over 700 pages long, I believe, and they gave them one night to read it. They didn't give them any time to debate the issue. And I mean, that's how the Senate works, folks. That's how how our government works. They try to just steamroll everything through without it actually being discussed because they know that it's not actually the best fit for our government or for America. But I do have highlights from Rand Paul's speech. I've gotten that hour speech down pretty short. So take a listen to these highlights from it. It's pretty good.
On a bill that will add $1.5 trillion to the debt over the next 10 years. This is a large amount of money and something that we should be very wary of. This is in addition to what we were already running debt of nearly $1 trillion. So we're adding a couple of hundred extra $1 billion a year to a budget and a country and a Congress that had already recklessly let spending get out of control. The bill is nearly 700 pages. It was given to us at midnight last night, and I would venture to say no one has read the bill. No one can thoroughly digest a 700-page bill overnight, and I do think that it does things that we really, really ought to talk about and how we should pay for them. So the reason I'm here tonight is to put people on the spot. I want people to feel uncomfortable. I want them to have to answer people at home who said, how come you were against President Obama's deficits, and then how come you're for Republican deficits? Isn't that the very definition of intellectual dishonesty? If you were against President Obama's deficits and now you're for the Republican deficits, isn't that the very definition of hypocrisy? You realize that this is the secret of Washington. The dirty little secret is the Republicans are loudly clamoring for more military spending, but they can't get it unless they give the Democrats welfare spending. So they raise all the spending. It's a compromise in the wrong direction. We should be compromising in the direction of going towards spending only what comes in. Congress is going to exceed their budget caps. We had something passed back in 2010. It was called PAYGO. It was supposed to say if you're going to pay new money, you had to go find an offset somewhere else. You could only pay as you go. It was sort of like a family would think about it. If you're going to spend some more money, you either got to raise your income or you got to save some money. You know how many times we've evaded it since 2010? 30 some odd times. When I try to get them to pay attention to their own rules, like 3 or 4 people will vote to pay attention to the rules. We are in a terrible state as a country. $20 trillion in debt is bigger than our entire economy. You wonder why the stock market is jittery? Well, one of the reasons is we do not have the capacity to continue to fund a government like this. We've been funding it with phony interest rates that are concocted and given to us by the Federal Reserve, but they aren't real. What if interest rates become real again? Anybody remember when interest rates were 5, 10, 15? I remember as a teenager them being 19 or 20%. But historically, they've often been at least 5. You know what happens to the government when our interest rate goes to 5 and they have to borrow for Social Security and Medicare and all the other stuff we do? There'll be a catastrophe in this country. Already, interest rates are ticking up. Stock market is jittery. If you ask a question why, maybe it has something to do with the irresponsibility of Congress spending money that we don't have. But here's the confusion. Some at home will say, we just want them to cooperate. If they would just hold hands and sing Kumbaya, everything would be fine. Well, guess what? That's what you've got. You saw both of the leadership of both sides opposing me because they are now clasped hand in hand. Everybody's getting what they want. Everybody's getting more spending. And what I would say to my Republican colleagues, you don't see them here, I'm not sure where they are, but what I would say to my Republican colleagues is, I know every one of you. I know every one of you. I've seen your speeches. I saw every one of you go after President Obama. Was that all just empty partisanship? Do you not really believe it? Every one of them in their states, I promise you, every one of them went home and probably will go home next week and say how they're fiscally conservative and they're against the debt. And almost all of them are going to vote for this new debt. Almost all of them are going to vote for $1 trillion debt in 1 year. And every one of the Republicans, at least, was against President Obama's debt.
So I'm going to stop it right there. It's not over yet. I'll play a little bit more. But I do want to talk about that. You see, we have all of these Republicans and so-called conservatives who are campaigning time after time on fiscally conservative policies. They're campaigning on how they want a smaller government, on how they want to reduce the outreach, reduce the spending of the government. How they want to do this and get a balanced budget. They want this. They campaign for it. They give passionate speeches for it. But then they get to Congress, and suddenly they don't stand for that anymore. Suddenly they have this view of the fact that government can do whatever it wants and we'll just keep funding it. Our debt will just keep increasing and increasing and increasing. While that little clip was playing, I looked up the debt of the U.S. It's $20.631 trillion. Now, before President Obama, it was around $10 trillion. He doubled it as a president. He added more debt than every other president combined. And now President Trump is on track to do the same thing. Now they're going to touch on it, or Rand Paul's going to touch on it later in the clip when I play it for you. He's going to touch on the fact that how liberals attack any Republican who is against extra spending by saying that they're not fiscally conservative if they voted for tax cuts. But the thing is, that's completely different. You can balance a budget with tax cuts. It doesn't mean that you can't balance a budget. The reason why we can't balance a budget currently is not because we've cut taxes. It's because both sides, Republicans and Democrats, refuse to limit spending anywhere. And so they make compromises with each other on both issues, and the spending just goes up and up and up. And there's never any check. Because both of the leaderships in the parties, they're essentially the same. The establishment politicians, they don't care about balancing our budget. They don't care about American money going into there, citizens' monies going into the government and funding it. All they care about is spending more and more money because they think that's how they're going to solve every issue. Folks, that's not how you solve issues. All right, I'm going to get back to the rest of this clip. Take a listen.
At least the Democrats are honest. They're not too concerned about the debt. Well, they are sometimes. They're concerned about the debt when it comes to taxes. because they don't want people to keep more of their own money. They are afraid somehow of the imbalance of that. But the thing is that we do have to watch the balance of money, how much comes in and goes out. And some have said, well, how can you be a deficit hawk if you voted for the tax cut? Well, one, because I think you own your labor, you own the fruits of your labor, you own all of it. You give up some of your labor to live in a civilized world. And so my question to you is that everything you make, everything you own, everything that comes from the sweat of your brow and the work of your hands is yours. And if you give up some, you're giving up your liberty. And you give up a little bit of your liberty, you give up a little bit of your wages to live in a civilized world, to have law and order, and have some government. So I'm okay with that. But I ask you, do you want to give up more or less? Do you want to give up 100% of your paycheck, or do you want to give up 10% of your paycheck? We should always be about minimizing government. So taxes really are about how much of your liberty you get to keep, how much of the liberty to continue spending your own money. And the other side of the ledger is the spending. Are we going to have some government spending? Yes. The Constitution laid out very specific requirements for what was allowed to do. Article 1, Section 8 says what Congress can do, and they're very few and limited. And yet what happened over time is that we began doing a lot of things that aren't there. And so when you look at government, you say, why is government so bad? Milton Friedman hit the nail on the head. Milton Friedman said, nobody spends somebody else's money as wisely as their own. That's the truth of it. And that's the way government is. So government will never be efficient because of the very nature of government. It's not an argument for no government, but it's an argument for minimizing how big government is. Government should never be involved in something that somebody else is already doing or that the private sector can do, because government will never be as efficient because nobody spends somebody else's money as wisely as their own. I think it's completely and utterly irresponsible, and I think it's something that no American family would do. I don't care whether you're a Democrat or Republican or independent. No American family lives the way your government does. It's completely and utterly irresponsible. So as we look at this debate, my hope is that both sides will come together and say, enough's enough. This is the time. Tonight I say no.
Folks, spending is something that has to come into check. I wrote an article about this over a year ago. I think it was January of 2017. I wrote an article about how the GOP doesn't actually stand for fiscal conservatism, something that they claim to time after time, and it just gets proven. Every time that the Republicans are in power, they sort of lose that fiscal conservatism within their policy. I don't know what changes between Republicans having majority and Democrats having majority besides them just pandering for the vote. But if you talk about this, if you actually realize what's happening, it's not good for our nation. Our debt is larger than our GDP currently. That's not good for an economy. That's not good for a nation. That's not good for a currency. But they continue to just spend it even when we don't have it. And folks, this isn't one party's fault. This isn't Democrats' fault. This isn't Republicans' fault. This isn't the independent party's fault. This is the fault of everyone, or the majority of people in government. For some reason, big government philosophies have taken hold among many and most politicians. And one of those is our president. He's better than having a Democrat in office, folks, but he definitely isn't fiscally conservative. The budget that he just proposed is going to be a $4.4 trillion budget. And it's going to increase the deficit and the debt tremendously. Now, he has some good policies in there, especially how we're going to be, in this budget, we're going to have money for the wall, how we're going to cut down some red tape from infrastructure, and how we're going to stop spending some money in places other than our nation. And that's all good. That's fine. But when you cut that spending, that means that you have less money that you're spending, but you don't need to add more. You don't need to add another area to spend. It has a $50 billion section in it in a bid to address criticism from some Republican senators that the Trump administration's initial emphasis on public-private partnerships would do little to help rural America. So as a plan to boost rural America for $50 billion. And, I mean, it has a lot of infrastructure, which is good. But, folks, this is going to dramatically increase our debt. And any fiscal conservative would be against this. Any fiscal conservative would look for a budget deal where you take off spending, where you finally balance the budget. Every single American family has to live based on their own means. They have to live within their means. They have to balance their own checkbook. They can't spend more than they take out. They can't spend more than they have, folks, because that's not how it works. But for some reason, when they go to Washington, when these politicians go to Washington, they forget how to balance that. They forget that you can't spend more than you have. They forget that if you want a small government, you can't throw money into every single category and boost it every year, increase the budget. President Obama hit a record for the largest budget with $4 trillion. Now President Trump is hitting a new record with $4.4 trillion. It's like they're trying to outdo the next one, trying to spend more than the last president, trying to add to our debt more and more, trying to expand the government more than it's ever expanded. Folks, that's not conservatism. That's not small government. That's not limited power. That's rather large government liberal ideals. It's hypocritical for any Republican to support adding to the debt. Hypocritical at the utmost degree. Yet every single leadership politician does it. I'm going to take a quick commercial break. Don't go anywhere. This is the Wise Conservative Show. Hey everybody, Connor Wise here with an exclusive sneak peek of the Wise Conservative Show. Don't go anywhere, I'll be right back. What it means to be a conservative is very simple. It means that you want to protect freedoms and liberties. You want to protect the Constitution and limit the government. It's a very simple definition. It's a very simple cause to follow. And this is what a lot of people do kind of value conservatism as.
Ever wanted to learn the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in less than 10 minutes? Are you looking for the truth about the so-called gender wage gap? Well, my friends, I'll let you in on a little secret. Prager University is a source that I use all the time when preparing for my show, the Jason Veely Program. Dennis Prager and his team have put together a remarkable organization that seeks to explain and spread Americanism through the power of the internet. Their short yet extremely informative videos reach more than 100 million people per year, and they want to reach you as well. Go on YouTube and type in Prager University, or go to prageru.com for all of their latest content. That's Prager, the letter U.com. prageru.com.
Hey everybody, Connor Wise here with an exclusive sneak peek of the Wise Conservative Show. Don't go anywhere, I'll be right back. With universal health care, which is essentially the next step beyond Obamacare, this is where Democrats want to take the country. This is where the left wants us to go. With universal health care, now there's no insurance companies, no one competing whatsoever, and the government controls it all. Have you ever wanted to stand up to your liberal professor? Have you ever wanted to help expand the conservative movement? Well, it sounds like you would be a perfect fit for Youth Revolt. Youth Revolt is a team of dedicated young conservatives fighting liberal indoctrination within our school system. If you're interested in being a part of this team by being a columnist or even hosting your own radio show, go ahead and click the Join Now tab at the top of youthrevolt.org. You'll be asked to answer a few questions, and a Youth Revolt team member will respond to you quickly. Be a part of something bigger than you. Be a part of Youth Revolt. Speak without fear.
If you got a business, that you didn't build that. Somebody else made that happen.
Get out of here, you idiot. Sorry about that, folks. Jason Veely here, host of the Jason Veely program. I'm a 22-year-old conservative who is fired up and ticked off at the direction the progressive left have taken this country. Join me every weeknight at 7 o'clock as we promote liberty, advance conservative principle, and work to restore the Constitution of the United States. I can get loud and I can get passionate. How can we afford not to when so much is on the line? Tune in to the Jason Veely program, live every weeknight at 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time on youthrevolt.org. I'll see you out on the battlefield.
I was assuming that it meant coverage, but if he says that there's a small group of people who understood what it was, so I'm like, what is it? What is confetti?
It gets 2 scoops. You know, everyone around the table gets 1, and no word if there were sprinkles.
He paid $38 million, looks like $38 million in taxes.
Are you tired of listening to the snowflake liberal media report about ice cream scoops and typos instead of real facts? Well, at the Wise Conservative Show, we promise you that we will not report about Kofifi, but instead about the truth. Instead, about the facts about what's going on in our nation. Join us every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on the Wise Conservative Show for your dose of unapologetic conservative talk radio. The Wise Conservative Show, only on Youth Revolt. Welcome back to the Wise Conservative Show. I'm your host, Connor Wise. So, we all know that a lot of social media sites are very anti-conservative. If you go on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, even YouTube, time after time, conservative posts are being censored. We've seen posts removed on Twitter constantly from it, accounts being shut down as spam accounts. On Facebook, the same thing happened. People share conservative articles, and Facebook automatically labels it as fake news. And they have AI and algorithms that do this, that censor fake news. And it seems like they're targeting conservative articles when it comes to that. And apparently, YouTube now, there's this whole thing that just came out where on the side of a video, there's these ads, of course. Well, a recent screenshot from the Google-owned platform shows an advertisement for Instagram appearing alongside a video from a Muslim cleric who was expelled from Israel in 1993 because of his suspected membership in Hamas. Well, the Instagram ad appears along the right-hand side of the video, and also Hamas is constantly referenced in the up next and the recommended and the paid-for ads, on the side. Now, it went on, people were outraged that there's all this Hamas content and how they constantly censor conservative videos and take them down for being offensive or being inappropriate, yet they have a video and multiple videos that are praising Hamas and praising the terrorist organization. Folks, if you don't know, Hamas is the terrorist organization that is essentially controlling Palestine. They've taken control of the government, and they're the reason why missiles continually get shot at Israel. They're the ones that use children as shields when Israel fires back. They're recognized as a terrorist organization by the U.S., by Israel, and by the entire European Union. Now, what we see here is another instance of conservative things being censored while extremist things are not. I mean, it seems like a common theme. You've probably all seen the pictures of where this person tried to get a cake made from, I believe it was Walmart. Don't count 100% on that, though. I don't remember the store 100%. But they tried to get this cake made of the Confederate flag, the battle flag. And it was rejected because it was offensive and they wouldn't do it. But then they submitted a different flag to be made on the cake, and it was the ISIS flag, and they made it. Because that wasn't offensive, that wasn't extremist. I mean, on Twitter, constantly, I see posts getting taken down, accounts being taken down out of the conservative community because they don't agree with the liberal bias of the social media network. I see posts getting taken down on Facebook or censored as fake news constantly. See, and this does bring up an interesting question, because these sites aren't the government. They're allowed to remove posts that they see fit to remove. But it gets a little interesting, a little suspicious when they're only removing conservative ideals, censoring conservatives. They're not the government. They have the right to do that. They're private industries. But it amazes me how all of these giant corporations and industries nowadays are allowed to get away with completely ignoring conservatives or ignoring the viewpoint of a lot of people and just going with a liberal agenda. It used to be that industries and corporations and companies didn't get political. But nowadays, it seems like they have to be liberal or else they're going to be criticized. Or else they're going to be sued and shut down. I mean, look at the cake shop that wouldn't bake the cake for the gay wedding. And now there is no cake shop there. That family has no money. It seems hypocritical how the liberal industries are allowed to do this, allowed to censor viewpoints, but then the conservative ones get sued and they lose in the lawsuit. They lose everything. That's where it becomes an extreme issue, folks, because they're allowing people that are leftists to do this, allowing companies that are leftists to do this, to censor conservatives, but they're not allowing a conservative cake shop to simply not bake a cake, to refuse service to someone. Folks, it's hypocrisy. It's contradictory. And it doesn't make sense. We've seen time after time where there's a different standard, a double standard, between companies that are liberal and companies that are conservative. And this is a lot to do with because the media props up those liberal ones and pushes down the conservative ones. Because the media is so biased, we see the outcomes of a lot of things to be very biased. And it continually happens, folks, time after time. And this isn't the first time, this isn't going to be the last time that there's going to be conservative censorship on a site, but they're still allowing extremist viewpoints from terrorist organizations. is going to continue to happen because to some people in this nation, the alt-left, a conservative viewpoint is worse than a terrorist. They think that we're worse for the world than terrorists are. Now, this is a small minority, folks, but the alt-left is a thing, and they are very vicious when it comes to conservative ideals. And they don't take no for an answer. They're very violent and adamant in pushing their agenda forward. And that's what we've seen time after time, and it's happening in industries, it's happening in companies, and it's happening on social media. All right, that's all for today's episode of The Wise Conservative Show. I'd like to thank you all for tuning in. You can find me on Spreaker.com, Facebook. The Wise Conservative Show now has its own page. You can find me on youthrevolt.org, iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, and iTunes. I'd like to once again thank you all for tuning in. And as always, God bless.